The dust-laden wind howled across the barren plains of Colorado Territory, 1876, as Winifred Hayes clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her 3 hungry children huddled close behind her like frightened baby birds. The journey had stripped her of everything: her husband, her home, her pride, leaving her with nothing but 3 small mouths to feed and an overwhelming desperation that threatened to consume her. "Mama, I'm hungry," whimpered 5-year-old Emma, the youngest of the 3, her once rosy cheeks now hollow from weeks of near starvation. Winifred swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I know, sweetheart, we'll find something soon." The words felt hollow on her tongue, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. 7-year-old Thomas and 9-year-old Sarah remained silent, having learned that complaints only brought more sorrow to their mother's already burdened heart. Deadwood Gulch loomed ahead, a ramshackle mining town that represented their last hope. Winifred had heard rumors of work for women: laundry, cooking, cleaning, anything to put food in her children's bellies. The thought of entering yet another strange town with nothing but the clothes on their backs made her stomach clench with anxiety, but she forced herself forward. For her children, she would do anything. The main street of Deadwood was a chaotic mess of mud, horses, and rough-looking men who eyed Winifred and her children with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. Saloons and gambling houses dominated the landscape, their raucous music a stark contrast to the quiet desperation of the Hayes family. "Look there, Mama," Sarah pointed toward a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read Quinn's General Store. "Maybe they need help." Winifred nodded, adjusting her worn bonnet and attempting to brush some of the trail dust from her children's clothes. "Stand up straight now," she instructed softly. "We may not have much, but we still have our dignity." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store, the warm air a welcome relief from the bitter cold outside. The shelves were stocked with supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, and Winifred's mouth watered at the sight. It had been so long since they'd had a proper meal. "Can I help you, madam?" The deep voice startled her, and she turned to find a tall man watching her from behind the counter. His face was partially obscured by a well-trimmed beard, but his eyes were kind, crinkling at the corners as he smiled at her. Winifred began, but her voice faltered. How did one ask for charity without losing the last shreds of their pride? "I was wondering if you might be hiring. I can clean, cook, do laundry." Before she could finish, Emma's small voice piped up, "Mama, my tummy hurts." The little girl clutched at her stomach, tears welling in her eyes. The man's gaze shifted to the children, taking in their thin frames and hollow cheeks. "When's the last time these little ones ate, madam?" Winifred felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Yesterday morning. We had a bit of jerky, but it's gone now." The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Name's Quentin Walsh," he said, extending a hand. "Most folks call me Quinn." "Winifred Hayes," she replied, her hand small and rough against his calloused palm. "These are my children, Sarah, Thomas, and Emma." Quinn moved out from behind the counter, and Winifred noticed the slight limp in his gait. "Store's closing for midday," he announced, flipping the sign on the door. "Mrs. Hayes, if you and your children would accompany me, I believe we might find a solution to your immediate problem." Winifred hesitated. In her experience, offers of help often came with strings attached, particularly for a widow with children and no protection. Quinn seemed to sense her trepidation. "My home's just behind the store, madam. I promise you'll be safe there." No strings attached, just a meal for hungry children. The sincerity in his eyes convinced her, and with a small nod, she ushered her children toward the back door that Quinn held open. His home was modest, but clean, a far cry from the cramped quarters many bachelors kept. A sturdy wooden table dominated the kitchen, a cast-iron stove radiating heat from the corner. "Please sit," Quinn gestured to the chairs around the table. When the children hesitated, looking to their mother for permission, he smiled and pulled out 4 chairs one by one. "There's plenty of room for everyone." As Winifred settled her children, Quinn moved efficiently around the kitchen, retrieving a loaf of bread from a bread box and slicing it thickly. He ladled steaming stew from a pot on the stove into bowls, the rich aroma filling the small space. "It's nothing fancy," he apologized, setting the food before them. "Just venison stew I made this morning keeps me fed between customers." The children looked to Winifred, who nodded her permission. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh, this is very kind." Quinn waved away her thanks. "Folks out here have to look after each other, Mrs. Hayes. That's the way of things in the West." As the children ate with barely contained desperation, Winifred took smaller, more measured bites, though her hunger was just as acute. Quinn sat across from her, sipping a cup of coffee, his eyes occasionally drifting to the window where snowflakes had begun to fall. "Storm's coming in," he remarked. "Where were you planning to stay tonight?" Winifred's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. The truth was, she had no plan beyond finding work. The last of their money had been spent on the stagecoach fare to Deadwood. "I thought perhaps there might be a boarding house willing to exchange lodging for work," she admitted. Quinn frowned. "Nearest boarding house for respectable women is full up with miners' wives. Other options." He trailed off, glancing at the children. "They're not suitable for a lady with young ones." The implications were clear, and Winifred felt her heart sink. Another dead end in a journey that seemed filled with nothing but— "I have a proposition, Mrs. Hayes," Quinn said after a moment of contemplation. "The room above the store is sitting empty. It's small, but it's clean and warm. You and your children are welcome to it while you find your footing in Deadwood." Winifred's pride warred with her pragmatism. "Mr. Walsh, I couldn't possibly, in exchange," he continued. "I could use help in the store, been meaning to hire someone anyway. The winter months bring more business and my leg doesn't take kindly to standing all day." He gestured to his left leg, which he'd stretched out beneath the table. "Shattered it in the war," he explained, noticing her glance. "Men's well enough to get around, but long days take their toll." It was a lifeline, and Winifred knew it. Still, she hesitated. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Walsh." His smile was gentle. "I know you're a mother who'd walk through fire for her children. That tells me all I need to know about your character, Mrs. Hayes." And so, with the snow falling thick outside and her children's bellies full for the first time in weeks, Winifred accepted Quinn's offer. It was meant to be temporary, just until she could save enough for a place of their own. But as she helped clear the dishes from the table where a cowboy had pulled out chairs for four, she couldn't help but feel they had found something more than just shelter from the storm. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Winifred rose early, preparing breakfast for her children in the small but functional kitchenette Quinn had installed in the room above the store. Sarah, the oldest and most responsible, helped her siblings dress while Winifred tidied their living space. By the time the store opened at 8 o'clock, the Hayes family was ready for the day. The children accompanied their mother downstairs, where Quinn had set up a small area in the back room with books and slates for their schooling. "Education's important," he'd insisted when Winifred expressed concern about the children being underfoot. "Besides, store gets lonely sometimes." Nice to hear young voices. The arrangement worked surprisingly well. Winifred managed the front of the store during the busiest hours, her natural charm and efficiency making her popular with customers. Quinn handled the bookkeeping and restocking, teaching Winifred the intricacies of running a general store during quieter moments. As December deepened, bringing harsher weather and longer nights, the store became a haven for the community. Quinn had always stocked essentials, but at Winifred's suggestion, they expanded their inventory to include homemade preserves, knitted goods, and fresh bread that Winifred baked each morning in the store's backroom oven. "You've got a head for business, Mrs. Hayes," Quinn remarked one evening as they tallied the day's receipts. The children were already asleep upstairs, the store quiet except for the occasional crackle from the wood stove. "My father owned a mercantile in Pennsylvania," she admitted. "I helped him before I married John." It was the first time she'd mentioned her late husband by name, and Quinn's expression softened. "How long has he been gone?" Winifred's fingers stilled on the ledger. 8 months. Influenza took him along with our baby. Charlotte was only 2. The pain was still raw, a wound that refused to heal completely. Quinn's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of understanding rather than pity. "I lost my wife and son to childbed fever 6 years ago. Alice was 23. Our boy never drew breath." The shared grief hung between them, a bridge rather than a barrier. "Is that why you came west?" Winifred asked. Quinn nodded. "Couldn't stand the empty rooms, the sympathy. Needed a fresh start where nobody knew me as that poor widower Walsh." He smiled wryly. "Though I suspect I'm still known as such around these parts." "Not to us," Winifred said softly. "To us, you're just Quinn." The way his eyes brightened at her words made something flutter in Winifred's chest, a sensation she'd thought buried along with John. It frightened her, this unexpected warmth, and she quickly returned her attention to the ledger. "We should finish these accounts," she said briskly. "Tomorrow's sure to be busy with Christmas, only 2 weeks away." If Quinn noticed her sudden shift in demeanor, he didn't comment. Instead, he launched into plans for a special display of toys and candies for the holiday, his enthusiasm infectious enough that Winifred soon forgot her momentary discomfort. As Christmas approached, Deadwood transformed. Despite its rough exterior, the mining town embraced the holiday spirit with surprising vigor. Evergreen boughs adorned doorways, candles glowed in windows, and the saloons toned down their usual rowdiness in deference to the season. Quinn's General Store became the heart of these celebrations. Under Winifred's direction, they created a magnificent display of holiday goods, candies from back east, oranges shipped at great expense from California, toys carved by local craftsmen, and bolts of festive fabric for new dresses and shirts. "Mama, look," Emma exclaimed one afternoon, pressing her nose against the store's front window. "It's snowing again." Sure enough, fat flakes were descending from a leaden sky, adding to the already substantial accumulation on the ground. "That'll bring the miners in early," Quinn predicted, limping slightly as he moved a crate of supplies. The cold always aggravated his old injury. Winifred noticed his discomfort. "Go sit by the stove, Quinn. I'll finish unpacking these." He started to protest, but she fixed him with a stern look that brooked no argument. "Sarah, bring Mr. Walsh a cup of coffee, please." The girl nodded eagerly, happy to be of service. At 9 years old, Sarah had blossomed under Quinn's quiet attention. He discovered her aptitude for mathematics and spent time each evening tutoring her, his patience never wavering even when the concepts proved challenging. Thomas, too, had found a mentor in Quinn. The 7-year-old boy, initially wary of this new man in their lives, had gradually warmed to him after Quinn taught him to whittle. Now Thomas shadowed the storekeeper whenever possible, soaking up knowledge about everything from tending horses to predicting weather from cloud patterns. Little Emma, naturally affectionate, had accepted Quinn immediately. She was often found perched on his knee as he read to her from one of the many books he kept in the store, her small hand patting his beard when he made the voices particularly entertaining. The transformation in her children wasn't lost on Winifred. They laughed more now, their cheeks filled out with regular meals, their eyes bright with security rather than fear. And it was all because of the kindness of a man who'd pulled out chairs for 4 hungry strangers. Riders coming. Thomas called from his post by the window. "Looks like Mr. Jennings and his boys." Quinn accepted the coffee Sarah brought him with a smile of thanks. "The Jennings place is 15 miles out. Must be important to bring them to town in this weather." Moments later, the bell above the door jangled as 4 snow-covered figures stomped into the store, bringing a gust of cold air with them. "Quinn, Mrs. Hayes," Samuel Jennings greeted them, removing his hat to reveal graying hair. "Glad to see you're open. Got caught by surprise with this storm." "Always open for good customers," Quinn replied, rising to shake the rancher's hand. "What brings you to town today?" "Wife's been pestering me about Christmas gifts," Jennings admitted sheepishly. "Figured we'd better get in before the pass gets too dangerous. Boys need new boots too." He gestured to his 3 sons, ranging from 16 to 20, who were already examining the store's offerings with interest. Winifred approached with a warm smile. "We just received a shipment of ladies' gloves that might interest you, Mr. Jennings. Fine kid leather with fur lining, perfect for a Christmas gift." As she guided the rancher toward the display, Quinn handled the sons' requests for boots and tobacco. The store hummed with activity, a welcome change from the quiet morning. "Say, Quinn," the eldest Jennings boy said as he tried on a pair of boots, Heard tell there's a Christmas dance at the schoolhouse next week. You taking Mrs. Hayes? The question, asked innocently enough, caused a sudden silence to fall, Winifred in the midst of wrapping Mrs. Jennings' gloves and tissue paper felt heat rise to her cheeks. Quinn cleared his throat. Haven't given it much thought, Daniel. Been busy with the store. Daniel grinned, oblivious to the tension. Better act fast. Pretty widow like Mrs. Hayes won't lack for invitations. Samuel Jennings cuffed his son lightly on the ear. Mind your manners, boy. Mrs. Hayes' arrangements are none of your concern. No offense meant, madam, Daniel said quickly. Just thought you two were. Well, you know. We're business associates, Winifred said primly, though her heart was racing inexplicably. Mr. Walsh has been kind enough to provide employment and lodging for my family while we establish ourselves in Deadwood. Quinn's expression was unreadable as he rang up the Jennings purchases. The transaction concluded with forced joviality, and soon the rancher and his sons were back on their horses, heading home before the storm worsened. An awkward silence settled over the store after their departure. The children, sensing the tension, retreated to the back room, leaving Quinn and Winifred alone among the shelves. I apologize for Daniel's presumption, Quinn said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Young men often speak without thinking. Winifred busied herself straightening a display of tinned goods. There's no need to apologize. It was a natural assumption given our arrangement. Quinn limped closer, his presence causing that strange flutter in her chest again. Would it be such a terrible assumption, Winifred? The use of her given name startled her. In the weeks they'd known each other, he'd never called her anything but Mrs. Hayes. I don't know what you mean, she said, though she did. Of course she did. I think you do, he replied gently. I've grown fond of you and your children, very fond. But if I've misread the situation, you haven't, Winifred interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. It's been such a short time since John and the children. Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. We needn't rush anything. But perhaps we could attend the Christmas dance together, as friends, if nothing else. The prospect filled Winifred with both excitement and trepidation. She hadn't attended a social function since before John's illness, hadn't worn a pretty dress or danced with a man in over a year. I have nothing suitable to wear, she said, grasping at practical concerns to mask her emotional turmoil. Quinn's smile was warm. I happen to know a very fine general store that carries beautiful fabrics. The owner might be persuaded to offer a special discount to a valued employee. Despite herself, Winifred laughed. Is that so? And would this generous offer extend to 3 growing children who would undoubtedly scandalize the town if they appeared in their everyday clothes? Most definitely, Quinn assured her, his eyes crinkling with humor. In fact, I insist upon it. Christmas comes but once a year after all. And so, despite her reservations, Winifred found herself agreeing to attend the dance. It wasn't a declaration or a promise, merely an evening of music and community. At least, that's what she told herself as she selected a length of deep blue wool for a new dress, ignoring the knowing smile of Mrs. Patterson, the town's seamstress, when she came in for measurements. The way that man looks at you, Winifred Hayes, Mrs. Patterson commented as she pinned the fabric around Winifred's waist, reminds me of how my Harold looked at me when we were courting, like you hung the moon and stars yourself. It's not like that, Winifred protested weakly. Quinn is simply kind. Kind, yes, the older woman agreed, but not simple. Quinn Walsh hasn't shown interest in any woman since he arrived in Deadwood. Then you come along with your 3 little ones and suddenly he's ordering fancy fabric and asking about the Christmas dance. That's not mere kindness, my dear. Winifred had no response to that, and Mrs. Patterson, satisfied she'd made her point, continued with the fitting in companionable silence. The night of the dance arrived with a fortunate break in the weather. The sky cleared, revealing a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch. Moonlight reflected off the snow, turning Deadwood into a silver wonderland that belied its usual gritty appearance. In the room above the store, chaos reigned as Winifred attempted to prepare herself and 3 excited children for the evening's festivities. Thomas, please hold still, she implored as she attempted to tame her son's cowlick with a damp comb. "Sarah, help Emma with her sash, would you, dear?" "Will there be cake, Mama?" Emma asked, squirming as Sarah tied the red ribbon around her waist. "I expect so," Winifred replied, finally abandoning Thomas's rebellious hair. "Mrs. Jensen from the bakery is providing refreshments." A knock at the door interrupted the flurry of activity. "Are you folks about ready?" Quinn's voice called. "Schoolhouse is filling up fast." Winifred opened the door to find Quinn standing there in his Sunday best dark trousers, crisp white shirt, and a waistcoat that emphasized his broad shoulders. His beard was neatly trimmed, his hair combed back from his forehead. He looked handsome in a way that made Winifred suddenly conscious of every imperfection in her own appearance. But then his eyes widened as he took in her blue wool dress with its modest lace collar, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style Mrs. Patterson had shown her. "You look beautiful," he said softly, the sincerity in his voice leaving no room for doubt. "As do you," she replied, flustered by the compliment. "I mean handsome, you look very handsome." Quinn's smile deepened and he turned his attention to the children. "And look at these fine young people. Miss Sarah, you're the spitting image of your mother. Thomas, you're quite the gentleman. And Miss Emma, that red ribbon is perfect for Christmas." The children preened under his praise, and soon they were bundled into their coats and making their way through the snowy streets toward the schoolhouse. Quinn offered Winifred his arm, which she accepted after only a moment's hesitation. The warmth of him beside her was comforting in the crisp night air. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorned the walls, oil lamps cast a golden glow over the proceedings, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. Nearly everyone in Deadwood had turned out for the celebration, from the wealthiest mine owners to the humblest laborers. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Walsh, Mrs. Jensen waved them over to the refreshment table. "I saved some of my special punch for the children." "No spirits in this batch," she assured Winifred with a wink. As the children eagerly accepted cups of the sweet concoction, Winifred found herself surrounded by the women of Deadwood, many of whom she knew only as customers from the store. They welcomed her warmly, asking about her children, complimenting her dress, and generally making her feel like a part of the community rather than an outsider. Across the room, Quinn was similarly engaged with a group of men, though his eyes frequently sought her out, a small smile playing at his lips whenever their gazes met. "He's quite taken with you," observed Mrs. Whittaker, the banker's wife, following Winifred's glance. "Quinn Walsh is considered quite a catch in these parts, you know. Owns his business outright, no debts, and gentle as a lamb despite looking like he could wrestle a bear." Winifred laughed, both embarrassed and pleased by the woman's frank assessment. "We're just friends, Mrs. Whittaker." The older woman raised a skeptical eyebrow. "For now, perhaps, but mark my words, that man has intentions." She patted Winifred's arm, "and it would do you good to consider them. A widow with children needs protection in a place like Deadwood." Before Winifred could respond, the music changed to a waltz and Quinn appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked formally, though his eyes twinkled with warmth. Yes, of course," Winifred stammered, placing her hand in his. "But the children are being thoroughly spoiled by Mrs. Jensen and her cookies," Quinn assured her, leading her to the center of the room where other couples were already twirling to the music. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, as he guided her into the steps of the waltz. Despite his slight limp, Quinn was a confident dancer, leading her with gentle pressure that made it easy to follow. "I haven't danced since before John fell ill," Winifred admitted as they moved among the other couples. "You dance beautifully," Quinn replied, "like you were born to it." The compliment warmed her, and Winifred found herself relaxing into his embrace, allowing the music to carry them across the floor. For those few minutes, the weight of widowhood, of struggling alone, of constant worry lifted from her shoulders. She was simply a woman dancing with a man who looked at her as if she were the only person in the room. The evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and more dances than Winifred could count. Even the children joined in, Thomas puffing with pride as he carefully led his little sister in a simple two-step, Sarah accepting an invitation from the schoolmaster's son with shy dignity. As midnight approached, signaling the end of the festivities, Quinn drew Winifred outside onto the schoolhouse's small porch. The night air was cold but still, the sky ablaze with stars. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Seeing you smile, watching you dance, it's been the highlight of my Christmas." Winifred pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it wasn't entirely the cold that made her shiver. "I should be thanking you, Quinn, for everything. These past weeks, you've given my children hope again." "Security, I can never repay that." "I don't want repayment," Quinn said, his voice low and earnest. "What I want." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I want to give you this, an early Christmas gift." Winifred accepted the package with trembling fingers. "Quinn, you've already given us so much. Open it," he encouraged gently. "Please." Inside the wrapping was a small velvet box. Winifred's heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket, oval-shaped and engraved with a pattern of tiny flowers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the cool metal reverently. "Open the locket," Quinn prompted. Inside was a tiny picture of her 3 children, their faces captured in remarkable detail despite the small size. On the opposite side was an empty space, waiting to be filled. "How did you?" Winifred began, tears pricking at her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson's husband is something of an amateur photographer," Quinn explained. "I asked him to take the picture while you were at your fitting last week. The children were sworn to secrecy." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. It wasn't merely beautiful, it was deeply personal, a recognition of what mattered most to her. "I don't know what to say," Winifred admitted, clutching the locket to her chest. Quinn stepped closer, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "You don't need to say anything now, but I hope you'll consider allowing me to court you properly, Winifred. I know it's soon, and I know your heart still carries John. I'm not asking you to forget him. I would never ask that." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "What I am asking is for a chance to show you and your children that there can be love after loss. That we might build something new together, something that honors the past but looks to the future." Winifred's mind raced. It was soon barely 4 months since she'd arrived in Deadwood with 3 hungry children and no prospects. Yet in that short time, Quinn had become essential to their lives, not just as a provider but as a friend, a teacher, a source of stability and warmth. "I can't promise anything," she said finally, meeting his gaze, "but I would be honored by your courtship, Quinn Walsh." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her lips. It lasted only a moment, but in that brief connection, Winifred felt something she'd thought lost forever, the stirring of new love, fragile but real. The moment was broken by the schoolhouse door opening, spilling light and noise onto the porch. "Mama, Mr. Quinn," Emma called, rushing to them with childish enthusiasm. "Mrs. Jensen says we can take home leftover cookies, a whole plateful." Quinn laughed, reaching down to swing the little girl up into his arms. "Is that so? Well, we'd better not keep those cookies waiting, should we?" As they gathered Thomas and Sarah and made their way back through the snowy streets to the store, Winifred touched the locket now hanging around her neck. It felt right somehow, this new beginning in the midst of winter, like the promise of spring hidden beneath the snow. The days leading up to Christmas were the busiest the store had ever seen. Miners coming in from remote claims, ranchers making special trips to town, and locals finalizing their holiday preparations created a steady stream of customers from opening until closing. Winifred and Quinn worked side by side, their new understanding adding a layer of sweetness to their interactions. A brush of hands as they passed each other, a shared smile over a customer's head, a lingering glance across the store's small gestures that spoke volumes about changing feelings. The children, intuitive as always, seemed to sense the shift. Sarah, practical beyond her years, approached Winifred one evening as she prepared dinner in their upstairs quarters. "Do you love Mr. Quinn, Mama?" she asked directly, her young face serious in the lamplight. Winifred nearly dropped the potato she was peeling. "Sarah, that's a very forward question. But do you?" the girl persisted. Because he loves you, I can tell, and he loves us too. Winifred set down her knife, wiping her hands on her apron. What makes you say that? Sarah gave her mother a look that suggested the answer should be obvious. He looks at you the way Papa used to, and he teaches Thomas things and reads to Emma and helps me with my sums even when he's tired. That's love, isn't it? Out of the mouths of babes, Winifred thought, amazed at her daughter's perception. Yes, I suppose it is. So do you love him back? Sarah pressed. Winifred hesitated. She'd been avoiding putting a name to her feelings, afraid that acknowledging them would somehow diminish what she'd had with John. But looking into her daughter's expectant face, she found herself unwilling to dissemble. I think I'm beginning to, she admitted softly. Would that be all right with you, Sarah, if I came to love Mr. Quinn? The girl's face broke into a wide smile. It would be wonderful, Mama. Then maybe he could be our papa and we could stay here forever instead of moving on come spring. The idea of permanence, of putting down roots in Deadwood with Quinn, sent a thrill of both excitement and fear through Winifred. Was it possible? Could they truly build a life here, a family merged from the remnants of two broken ones? Before she could pursue the thought further, Thomas and Emma burst into the room, chattering excitedly about something Quinn had shown them in the store. Mama, Mr. Quinn has a surprise for Christmas, Emma announced, bouncing on her toes. But it's a secret and we can't tell. Thomas nodded vigorously. It's going to be the best Christmas ever, he says. Winifred laughed, tucking away her conversation with Sarah for later contemplation. Is that so? Well, I like surprises. Now wash your hands for dinner, both of you. As the children scrambled to obey, Winifred returned to her cooking, her mind filled with possibilities she'd never dared consider, before Quinn Walsh pulled out chairs for her hungry family. Christmas Eve arrived with another heavy snowfall that transformed Deadwood into a hushed, white landscape. The store closed early, and Quinn joined the Hayes family upstairs for a simple but festive dinner. I've never had such a magnificent Christmas feast, Quinn declared as he helped himself to a second serving of Winifred's roast chicken. You've outdone yourself, Winifred. She blushed at the praise, still not entirely accustomed to hearing her given name from his lips. It's nothing fancy. I wish I could have managed a proper goose or at least a ham. Nonsense, Quinn replied firmly. It's not what's on the table that matters, but who's around it. The children, dressed in their Sunday best, despite the informal nature of the gathering, nodded in agreement, their plates already cleaned of every morsel. Can we have our Christmas story now, Mr. Quinn? Emma asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. It had become a tradition over the past weeks for Quinn to read to the children each evening, and Christmas Eve demanded something special. I believe that can be arranged, Quinn agreed, rising from the table. But first, let's clear these dishes and get comfortable by the fire. The small sitting area of the apartment soon transformed. Quinn stoked the fire to a cheerful blaze while Winifred and the children cleared the table. When all was tidy, they gathered on the worn but comfortable furniture, Quinn in the armchair, Winifred on the small sofa with Emma beside her, Sarah and Thomas on cushions on the floor. Quinn produced a well-worn book from his coat pocket. The Night Before Christmas, he announced, showing them the cover. My mother read this to me every Christmas Eve until I was grown. I thought perhaps we might make it our tradition as well. The simple statement, our tradition, hung in the air, full of meaning. Winifred met Quinn's eyes over Emma's head and smiled, a wordless acknowledgement of the future they were beginning to envision together. The story entranced the children, Quinn's deep voice bringing the magical tale to life. Even Thomas, who at 7 was beginning to affect a certain boyish disdain for baby stories, listened with rapt attention, his eyes wide as Quinn described the miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. When the tale concluded with its famous closing line, a contented silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of carolers somewhere in the snowy streets below. Time for bed, I think, Winifred said finally, noting Emma's drooping eyelids. Father Christmas won't come if you're still awake, you know. This pronouncement caused immediate action. The children, though they'd long since outgrown belief in such fancies, were unwilling to risk missing any Christmas magic. They scurried to prepare for bed, Emma pausing only to plant a kiss on Quinn's cheek before allowing her mother to lead her away. When Winifred returned from tucking the children in, she found Quinn standing by the window, watching the snow fall in the darkness. "They're finally asleep," she said softly, joining him, "or pretending to be, at least." Quinn smiled, turning to face her. "They're good children, Winifred. You've raised them well despite the hardships." "We've managed," she agreed. "Though I must admit, things have been considerably easier since a certain storekeeper took us in." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Quinn's hand found hers, his fingers warm and slightly calloused against her skin. "I have something for you," he said finally. "Another Christmas gift, though this one is perhaps more for me than for you." Curiosity piqued, Winifred watched as he reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small object. In the firelight, she could see it was a key, old-fashioned and heavy, its brass surface polished to a soft glow. "A key?" she questioned, accepting it when he pressed it into her palm. "To the store," Quinn explained, "and to the apartment and to everything I have." Understanding dawned slowly, and Winifred's heart began to race. "Quinn, are you asking you to marry me?" he finished for her, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes, Winifred Hayes, that's exactly what I'm doing. I know it's soon, and I know we're still learning about each other, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He took both her hands in his, the key nestled between their palms. "I love you. I love your children. I want us to be a family, not someday in the distant future, but now. Life out here is too uncertain, too precious to waste time when we've been fortunate enough to find each other." Tears welled in Winifred's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "The children will be overjoyed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Especially Sarah. She asked me just the other day if I loved you." "And what did you tell her?" Quinn asked, his own voice rough with emotion. Winifred met his gaze directly, allowing him to see the truth in her eyes. "I told her I was beginning to, but I was wrong, Quinn. I don't think I'm beginning to love you, I think I already do." The admission, once made, felt right, like stepping into a warm house after a long journey through winter's cold, like coming home. Quinn's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her gently into his arms. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. Winifred melted into it, her arms winding around his neck as she returned his fervor with her own. When they finally parted, both breathless and flushed, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then, Mrs. Hayes? Will you marry me?" Winifred laughed softly, joy bubbling up like a spring. "Yes, Mr. Walsh, I will marry you, though I warn you, it's not just me you're getting, it's four for the price of one." "The best bargain I've ever struck," Quinn declared, pulling her close again. "And I'm a businessman, so I should know." Their laughter mingled in the warm air of the apartment, sealing their agreement as surely as any contract. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Deadwood in a blanket of pristine white, a clean slate, a fresh beginning for the new year and their new life together. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having passed in the night to leave a sparkling landscape under a brilliant blue sky. The Hayes children woke at dawn, their excited whispers and muffled giggles pulling Winifred from sleep far earlier than she would have preferred. "Shhh," she cautioned as she emerged from her small bedroom, wrapped in her robe. "Let's not wake the whole building." "But Mama, it's Christmas," Emma protested, dancing from foot to foot in her eagerness. "Can we open our stockings, please?" Winifred smiled, unable to resist her youngest's enthusiasm. "Yes, but quietly, and then we'll have breakfast before Mr. Quinn joins us." What she didn't tell them was that Quinn was already on his way, carrying the special surprises he'd hidden in the store below. They had agreed that he would come up after the children had discovered their stockings, small affairs, filled with candy, oranges, and tiny wooden toys that Winifred had managed to purchase and hide without their knowledge. The children fell upon their stockings with delight, exclaiming over each small treasure as if it were gold. Winifred watched them, her heart full. Last Christmas had been so bleak, with John recently buried and Charlotte's loss still an open wound. She had barely managed to provide the children with a special meal, let alone gifts. Now, thanks to Quinn, they were warm, fed, and experiencing the joy that Christmas should bring to young hearts. A knock at the door announced Quinn's arrival, and the children rushed to greet him. "Merry Christmas," he boomed, entering with his arms full of packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. "I believe Father Christmas left these at the store by mistake, had to bring them up right away." The children's eyes widened at the sight of more gifts, real gifts, substantial enough to require both arms to carry. "Are those for us?" Thomas asked, his voice hushed with disbelief. "Well, let's see," Quinn said, setting the packages on the table and making a show of examining them. "This one says Sarah, and here's one for Thomas. And Emma. And look, even one for your mother. Yes, I believe these are definitely for the Hayes family." The children looked to Winifred for permission, which she granted with a nod, her own curiosity piqued by the package with her name on it. Quinn had already given her the locket, which now hung around her neck, and the key. What more could he have planned? Sarah, ever dignified, carefully untied the string on her package to reveal a leather-bound book, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. "Oh," she breathed, running her fingers over the embossed title. "I've wanted to read this forever, thank you, Mr. Quinn." Thomas was next, tearing into his package with boyish abandon to find a handsome pocket knife with a staghorn handle, accompanied by a small book on whittling techniques. "My own knife," he exclaimed, eyes shining. "And it's even better than yours, Mr. Quinn." Emma, not to be outdone, ripped the paper from her gift to reveal a beautiful doll with porcelain features, real hair, and a wardrobe of tiny dresses. "She's perfect," the little girl whispered, cradling the doll as tenderly as if it were a real baby. "I'm going to name her Charlotte." The name, so casually spoken, brought tears to Winifred's eyes. Charlotte, her lost baby, now remembered in this way. She glanced at Quinn and found him watching her, understanding in his gaze. He had known what the name would mean to her, had perhaps even suggested it to Emma beforehand. "Your turn, Mama," Sarah prompted, breaking the emotional moment. With fingers that trembled slightly, Winifred unwrapped her own package. Inside was a handsome leather ledger, its cover tooled with an intricate pattern of flowers and vines. Opening it, she found the first page inscribed in Quinn's neat handwriting. "For Mrs. Winifred Hayes Walsh, co-proprietor, Walsh and Hayes General Store, may our business and our lives together prosper." The date he'd written was January 15, 1877, just 3 weeks away. "Is that?" Winifred looked up at Quinn, who was watching her reaction carefully. "Our wedding date," he confirmed. "If it suits you. I've spoken to Reverend Phillips, and he's available that day." The children, who had been absorbed in their own gifts, suddenly became very still, their eyes darting between their mother and Quinn. "Wedding," Sarah repeated, her voice rising with excitement. "You're getting married." Quinn moved to stand beside Winifred, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I've asked your mother to marry me," he told the children solemnly, "and she has done me the great honor of accepting. But," he added, his expression growing serious, "I want to be very clear that I'm asking all of you to be my family. I would be proud to be your father if you'll have me." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then bedlam erupted. Emma launched herself at Quinn with a squeal of delight, while Thomas whooped loudly enough to wake the neighbors. Sarah, too dignified for such displays, simply approached Quinn and, with tears in her eyes, wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. "I knew it," she whispered, looking up at him with a radiant smile. "I knew you loved us." Quinn's own eyes grew suspiciously bright as he returned her embrace. "More than I can say, Sarah, all of you." Winifred watched the scene with her heart so full it threatened to burst. From hunger to fullness, from desperation to hope, from loneliness to love, the transformation seemed almost too much to believe. Yet here they were, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their new life together. "We should celebrate," Quinn declared once the initial excitement had calmed somewhat. "I believe there might be some special breakfast fixings downstairs in the store. Who wants to help me bring them up?" All 3 children volunteered eagerly, following Quinn out the door with chattering excitement, leaving Winifred alone for a moment with her thoughts and her emotions. She touched the ledger reverently, tracing the inscription with her fingertip. "Walsh and Hayes General Store, a partnership equal and respectful, Not charity, not obligation, but a shared venture between equals. It was, perhaps, the most meaningful gift anyone had ever given her, the acknowledgement of her worth, her capabilities, her place in the world. When Quinn returned with the children, bearing ingredients for a Christmas feast unlike any the Hayes family had enjoyed in years, Winifred was waiting with a smile that came from the deepest part of her heart. "Merry Christmas, Quinn," she said softly, rising to help him with his burden. "The first of many," he replied, his eyes crinkling with happiness. "The first of many, my love." The 3 weeks leading to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Word spread quickly through Deadwood about the upcoming nuptials, and the community rallied around the couple with enthusiasm that touched Winifred deeply. Mrs. Patterson insisted on creating a proper wedding dress, refusing payment despite Winifred's protests. "Consider it my wedding gift," the seamstress declared as she fitted Winifred in a gown of cream-colored wool with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her day, especially one who's had to be as strong as you have, Mrs. Jensen from the bakery volunteered to bake a wedding cake. Mrs. Whittaker organized a group of ladies to decorate the church. Even Samuel Jennings contributed, offering the use of his finest carriage to transport the bride and her children to the ceremony. Quinn, for his part, threw himself into preparations for their life together. The apartment above the store underwent a transformation, with the addition of a larger bed in what would become their shared bedroom, and improvements to the children's sleeping areas to give them more privacy and comfort. The store itself remained busy, but Quinn and Winifred managed to steal moments together between customers, planning their future and learning more about each other with each passing day. "I want to expand the store come spring," Quinn told her one evening as they closed up for the night. "Add a proper millinery section. The ladies of Deadwood deserve more than just practical goods, they should have beautiful things too." Winifred smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea, and perhaps we could add more books, not just practical manuals, but novels and poetry." "Sarah would be thrilled. Anything you want," Quinn promised, drawing her into his arms for a brief kiss. "This is our store now, our future, we'll build it together." The day before the wedding, a surprise visitor arrived at the store, John Hayes' brother, Michael, whom Winifred had written to after accepting Quinn's proposal. Uncle Michael. The children cried in unison when the tall, bearded man entered the store, the family resemblance to their father unmistakable in his features. Winifred embraced her brother-in-law warmly. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she admitted. "The winter travel is so difficult." Michael Hayes shrugged off his snow-covered coat. "Wouldn't miss my only brother's widow getting remarried," he said, his tone gentle despite the potentially awkward statement. "Had to see for myself what kind of man won over the formidable Winifred Hayes." Quinn stepped forward, extending his hand. "Quinn Walsh, it's an honor to meet you, Mr. Hayes. Your brother was clearly a remarkable man to have been loved by such a remarkable woman." Michael's eyebrows rose slightly at this diplomatic greeting, and he clasped Quinn's hand firmly. "John was the best of men," he agreed, "left big boots to fill." "I would never presume to replace him," Quinn said seriously, "but I hope to honor his memory by caring for his family as he would have wanted." The two men regarded each other steadily, an unspoken assessment taking place. Then Michael nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw in Quinn's eyes. "John would approve," he said simply, turning back to Winifred. "You've chosen well, Winnie." Relief washed over her at his approval. Though she had made her decision independently, having John's only brother give his blessing lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. That evening, as was tradition, Quinn stayed at the town's small hotel while Winifred and the children remained in the apartment with Michael. The separation, brief though it would be, felt strange after weeks of daily closeness. "Nervous?" Michael asked Winifred as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed. "A little," she admitted. "Not about marrying Quinn, I'm certain about that, but about starting over. Being a wife again, sharing my life with someone new." Michael nodded thoughtfully. John talked about you, those last days when I was with him. He was worried about you and the children alone in the world. Winifred's breath caught. He never told me you were with him at the end. He didn't want to worry you, Michael explained gently. You had enough on your plate with the children and Charlotte's illness, but I was there. And do you know what he said to me? Winifred shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. He said, make sure Winnie knows it's all right to be happy again. Tell her I want that for her, more than anything. Michael reached out to clasp her hand. I didn't tell you then because the grief was too raw. But I'm telling you now, on the eve of your wedding to a good man who loves you and your children, John would be at peace knowing you've found happiness again. The tears spilled over then, not tears of sorrow but of release. Thank you, Winifred whispered. That means more than I can say. Michael squeezed her hand. Just promise me one thing, Winnie. Anything. Name your first son with Quinn after his uncle Michael, he said with a mischievous grin so like John's that it made her heart ache even as she laughed. I promise, she agreed, grateful beyond words for this connection to her past, this bridge to her future. Morning dawned clear and cold on January 15, 1877, Winifred and Quinn's wedding day. The small church at the edge of Deadwood was filled to capacity, the entire town turning out to witness the union of two people who had come to represent something important to the community: resilience, hope, and the possibility of new beginnings. Winifred stood in the small antechamber of the church, her cream-colored gown a stark contrast to the black she had worn for so long. Sarah, Thomas, and Emma were dressed in their finest clothes, their faces shining with excitement. You look like an angel, Mama, Emma breathed, reaching up to touch the simple veil Mrs. Patterson had fashioned from delicate lace. The most beautiful bride I've ever seen, Michael agreed, offering Winifred his arm. Are you ready? Winifred took a deep breath, steadying herself. Yes, she said with quiet certainty. I'm ready. The small church fell silent as the doors opened and Winifred appeared on Michael's arm. The children preceded her down the aisle, Sarah and Emma scattering dried flower petals saved from summer blooms, Thomas walking with solemn dignity as he carried the rings on a small cushion. But Winifred had eyes only for Quinn, standing at the altar with an expression of such wonder and love that it took her breath away. He was handsome in his new suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. When Michael placed her hand in Quinn's, the connection between them was palpable, a current of emotion that flowed between their joined fingers and spread to encompass their hearts. Reverend Phillips began the ceremony with words about love's resilience, about how true hearts find each other even across the vast prairies and mountains of the West. He spoke of family, not just by blood but by choice, and of the sacred duty of parents to nurture the young lives entrusted to their care. When the time came for their vows, Quinn spoke with clear conviction. I, Quentin James Walsh, take thee, Winifred Ann Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Winifred's voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, but her eyes never wavered from Quinn's. I, Winifred Ann Hayes, take thee, Quentin James Walsh, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. Then, in a departure from tradition that had been Quinn's idea, he knelt down to be at eye level with the children. Sarah, Thomas, Emma, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed church. I make these vows to you as well. I promise to care for you, to guide you, to support your dreams and comfort your sorrows. I promise to honor the memory of your father while striving to be worthy of the title of father myself. And I promise that from this day forward you will never lack for bread, for shelter, or for love as long as I draw breath. There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Quinn then presented each child with a small gold band, similar to a wedding ring but sized for their young fingers. These are my promise to you, he told them. A visible sign that you are as much a part of this marriage as your mother and I. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur for Winifred: the exchange of rings, Reverend Phillips' prayer of blessing, And finally, the words she had both anticipated and feared she would never hear again. I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride. Quinn's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, a perfect balance of passion and respect. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, the applause was thunderous, the joy of the community a tangible force that seemed to lift them on waves of goodwill. The celebration that followed at the town hall was the most festive event Deadwood had seen in years. Mrs. Jensen's cake was a marvel of culinary artistry, 3 tiers of white frosting decorated with sugared fruit that must have cost a small fortune to ship to the remote mining town in winter. Quinn and Winifred moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone from the wealthiest mine owner to the humblest laundress. The children darted between groups of adults, proudly showing off their new rings and accepting treats from indulgent townsfolk. Mrs. Walsh, Quinn murmured in Winifred's ear as they shared a quiet moment between greetings. How does it sound? Wonderful, she replied honestly, leaning into his solid warmth. Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to when the celebration is over and we can begin our life together properly. Quinn's eyes darkened with understanding and he squeezed her hand. Just a few more hours of being social, my love, then we have the rest of our lives for privacy. The prediction proved accurate. As evening fell, the wedding guests began to disperse, and finally only family remained. Michael had agreed to take the children for the night, allowing the newlyweds their privacy while remaining close enough for the children's comfort. Be good for your Uncle Michael, Winifred instructed as she hugged each child goodbye. We'll see you tomorrow for breakfast. In our new home, Quinn added, ruffling Thomas's hair affectionately, as a family. When the children had departed with Michael, Quinn turned to his new wife with a smile that made her heart flutter. Mrs. Walsh, he said formally, offering his arm, may I escort you home? You may indeed, Mr. Walsh, she replied, slipping her hand through his arm. I believe we have some matters to discuss in private. Their walk through Deadwood's snowy streets was met with knowing smiles and good-natured calls from the few townsfolk still about. By the time they reached the store, Winifred's cheeks were flushed from both the cold and anticipation. To her surprise, Quinn swept her into his arms as they reached the door. Tradition, he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold with ease despite his old injury. The store was dark and quiet, the familiar shelves and counters transformed into shadowy silhouettes in the moonlight that streamed through the windows. Quinn didn't pause but carried Winifred directly up the stairs to their apartment, now transformed into a proper home for a family of 5. He set her gently on her feet in the sitting room where a fire had been laid ready in the grate. Striking a match, Quinn lit the fire and several lamps, bathing the room in warm golden light. Welcome home, Mrs. Walsh, he said softly, returning to stand before her. With gentle hands, he removed the pins securing her veil, setting them aside before unwinding the delicate lace from her hair. You are the most beautiful bride Deadwood has ever seen. Winifred's breath caught at the tenderness in his touch, the reverence in his gaze. And you the most handsome groom. Quinn's smile deepened, his eyes never leaving hers as he slowly unwound the elaborate knot of hair at the nape of her neck, allowing the chestnut waves to cascade over her shoulders. I have dreamed of seeing you like this, he admitted, his voice low and intimate. Since that first day when you walked into my store with 3 hungry children, something in me recognized you, as if my heart had been waiting for you without my knowing it. Winifred reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his beard with trembling fingers. I was so afraid, she whispered. Afraid to trust, to hope, to love again, but you made it impossible not to love you, Quinn Walsh. Impossible not to hope for a future together. His kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, a husband's kiss rather than a suitor's. Winifred responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed herself against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Winifred Walsh. And I promise you, for as long as I live, you and your children, our children, will never want for anything I can provide. I don't need riches or luxury, Winifred assured him, her hands framing his beloved face. Just you and our family and this life we're building together. That's wealth beyond measure. Quinn's smile was tender as he led her toward their bedroom, toward the beginning of their life as husband and wife. Then we are the richest people in all of Deadwood, my love. The richest people indeed. Spring came early to Deadwood in 1877, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softening earth. The town itself seemed to awaken from winter's grip, stretching and growing as new buildings rose and old ones received fresh coats of paint. Walsh and Hayes General Store flourished under its new partnership. The millinery section Quinn had promised became a reality, drawing female customers from as far as 20 miles away. The expanded book selection proved equally popular, creating a small but loyal clientele who valued literature even in the rough mining town. But the greatest transformation was in the family that lived above the store. The Hayes children, now officially Walsh children after Quinn's formal adoption of them in March, blossomed under the security of their new life. Sarah's academic abilities flourished with proper schooling, and Quinn's continued tutoring. Thomas developed impressive skills with his whittling knife, creating small wooden figures that Quinn proudly displayed in the store window. Emma, always the most resilient of the three, simply radiated happiness, her natural affection finding a willing recipient in Quinn, whom she now called Papa without hesitation. For Winifred, the months since her wedding had been a revelation. The partnership she and Quinn had forged extended beyond business to every aspect of their lives. They shared responsibilities, decisions, joys, and occasional disagreements with a mutual respect that deepened their love daily. On a particularly fine April morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of their bedroom, Winifred lay in Quinn's arms, savoring the quiet moments before the day's activity began. "I have news," she said softly, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertip. "Something wonderful." Quinn caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Tell me, love." Winifred propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling in waves around her shoulders as she looked into her husband's eyes. "I believe we'll need to prepare the small bedroom for a new occupant come November." For a moment, Quinn simply stared at her, processing her words, then his face transformed with dawning joy. "Winifred, are you saying?" She nodded, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Quinn, our baby." The wonder and love that filled his expression was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her close, his hands gentle against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." "I thought perhaps we might name him Michael if it's a boy," Winifred suggested, remembering her promise to John's brother. "And if it's a girl?" "Alice," Quinn supplied softly. "After my first wife, would that be all right with you?" The question touched Winifred deeply, this acknowledgement of their past loves, this honoring of those who had gone before. "It would be perfect," she assured him. "Alice Charlotte Walsh." Quinn kissed her then, a kiss full of gratitude and wonder and promise. When they parted, he held her gaze with unexpected solemnity. "Do you ever think about that day, when you first came to Deadwood with the children?" Winifred nodded. "Often, how could I not? It was the turning point of our lives." "I remember every detail," Quinn confessed. "The way you stood so straight despite your exhaustion, the children's hollow cheeks, the pride in your voice when you asked for work instead of charity." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I knew then, somehow, that my life was about to change forever. That you were meant to be here with me. It seems impossible that so much could change in less than a year," Winifred marveled. "From desperation to such happiness." Quinn's smile was tender. "Not impossible, just the way life should be, full of second chances and new beginnings." His hand came to rest on her stomach again, protective and reverent. "And now another new beginning, growing right here." The sound of movement from the children's rooms signaled the end of their private moment. Soon the apartment would be filled with the bustle of breakfast preparations, school books being gathered, and the 100 small routines that made up their family life. "We should get up," Winifred sighed, though she made no move to leave the comfort of Quinn's embrace. "In a minute," he replied, holding her close. Just one more minute to be grateful for everything that brought us to this moment. As they lay there, wrapped in each other's arms with the morning sunlight painting patterns across their bed, Winifred reflected on the journey that had led them here. From the desperate widow with 3 hungry children to the beloved wife and mother she was now. From the lonely storekeeper with a wounded heart to the husband and father Quinn had become. It had begun with hunger, 3 children crying for bread, and a mother's desperate prayer for salvation. And it had been answered by a simple act of kindness, a cowboy who set a table and pulled out chairs for 4. Now there would be 5 chairs at their table come November, and perhaps more in the years to follow. Their family would grow, their love would deepen, and their story would continue to unfold in ways they could scarcely imagine. But whatever the future held, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that they would face it together, the family that hunger had brought together and love had made whole. Later that day, as Quinn helped a customer select supplies for a prospecting expedition, he caught sight of Winifred across the store. She was straightening a display of ribbons, the afternoon sunlight catching in her hair and gilding her profile. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up and smiled, that special smile that was reserved only for him, full of love and shared secrets. In that moment, Quinn Walsh was struck anew by how fortunate he was. How a simple decision to feed hungry children had led to the greatest happiness of his life. How the family he'd thought forever lost to him had been restored in a different form, equally precious. When the store closed that evening, he gathered his family around the dinner table, the same table where he'd first set places for 4 hungry strangers. Now it was their family table, laden with good food and surrounded by voices raised in conversation and laughter. As Quinn bowed his head to say grace, his heart so full it seemed it might overflow, he gave thanks not just for the food before them, but for the hunger that had brought Winifred and her children to his door. For sometimes, he reflected, it is our deepest needs that lead us to our greatest blessings. And as he looked around at the faces of his wife and children, Sarah thoughtful, Thomas mischievous, Emma radiant, and Winifred glowing with their secret joy, Quinn Walsh knew that he had found the richest treasure the West could offer. Not gold from the mines of Deadwood, but the pure gold of family, of belonging, of love that had been tested by loss and emerged stronger for the tempering. For what we are about to receive, he prayed, his deep voice steady with conviction, may we be truly thankful. And they were. Truly and deeply thankful. For the bread that had first brought them together, and for the love that would sustain them all the days of their lives.